She moved with her family to Nebraska when she was 2 years old. She was raised on a ranch in the White River just north of Chadron. She attended schools at St. Mary's in O'Neill and St. Agnes Academy in Alliance. She moved to Rapid City with her mother in 1920, met and married Bud Duhamel in 1924. They had been married 67 years at the time of her death in November. Good evening. I'm Bill Duhamel, president of Duhamel Broadcasting Enterprises. During the Depression and the height of the drought, my mother was forced to go to work to save the Duhamel Company from bankruptcy. As a retail merchant, she recognized the appeal of radio and used it effectively in reestablishing the Duhamel Trading Post in the late 30s. In 1943, she became a minority stockholder of KOBH Radio, and in 1954, she bought out the other stockholders in the radio station, which had changed its call letters to KOTA. Following her acquisition of KOTA, Mom made application for the construction of the second television station in South Dakota, and in 1955, KOTA TV went on the air. A couple of years later, a group of rural people from the Panhandle approached her with an offer to raise money to bring television to the northern part of the Nebraska Panhandle. Remembering her earlier years when she was raised on a ranch in the area, she agreed, but turned down the offer of donations and instead issued debentures to each person who contributed money to start KDUH at Hay Springs. Within a few years, she had paid everyone back with interest. Unfortunately, a television station with an hour and a half of local news each day was not economically viable in a town of only a few hundred people. And in 1970, she expanded the coverage of KDUH by building a 2,000-foot tower west of Alliance, providing coverage for the entire Panhandle. In 1981, she moved the studios from Hay Springs to Scottsbluff and put the station on a secure financial basis. Meanwhile, Duhamel Broadcasting Enterprises has grown to include 4 television stations and an application for the addition of an FM to go along with the original AM station that she had bought into nearly 50 years ago. 30 years ago, in 1961, Helen Duhamel was elected to be president of the South Dakota Broadcasters Association, the first woman to be elected president of any state broadcasting association. Although she lived most of her adult life in South Dakota, her roots in Nebraska remained strong and led to the establishment of KDUH TV in the Panhandle 34 years ago. She died on November 8th of last year, but I am pleased to say that I had received Larry Walkland's letter congratulating her on her election to the Nebraska Broadcasters Association Hall of Fame earlier that week. I had visited with her at the nursing home and informed her of this honor. She was quite pleased and proud of the recognition from your association. The next day, I flew to Washington, D.C., and while there, received a call that she had suffered a massive stroke and was in a coma.
Vision of what could be done with broadcasting. Oh, Helen, we'll miss you. We're glad we had her, and glad I was here.
Just one of scores of former KOTA employees who fondly remember our boss. Mrs. Helen Duhamel died this morning in Rapid City. Our top story tonight. Good evening, everyone. I'm Sandra Cole.
And I'm Bill Knutson. Yes, it is. It's a sad note for those of us here at KOTA. The founder and former board chairman of Duhamel Broadcasting died this morning. Helen Duhamel was 86. She was, by any measure, an extraordinary woman. A pioneer broadcaster mixed with an astute knowledge of the business world. Helen Duhamel bought KOTA Radio in 1954, and then in May of 1955, she brought the first television station to western South Dakota. One of her first employees was country singer Buddy Meredith.
One time during our television show, I tried to do commercials. So they didn't pan out too well. So when she called me into her office, she said, well, we all can't be good at everything. So it was her way of telling me, boy, you're not going to be an announcer.
In 1958, she opened KDUH television in Hay Springs, Nebraska. In 1966, the third television station went on the air as KHSD in the northern Black Hills. Then in October of 1977, KSGW went on the air in Sheridan.
We're most happy to have you here. Feel welcome, and we, again, hope it's a lasting and long relationship that exists between KSGW and the city of Sheridan.
Well, thank you very much. We hope it will be very successful for all of us, for Sheridan as well as the station.
Mrs. Duhamel received numerous honors through the years. She was president of the South Dakota Broadcasting Association in 1961. She was the first woman in the United States to be selected as a state president. She was also elected to the South Dakota and to the Nebraska Broadcasting Halls of Fame. And she was nationally known as a broadcast leader and pioneer. And the visitations will be Sunday afternoon at Osheim Catherine Funeral Home from 2 until 6 with the Rosary service at 5 o'clock. And then the Mass of the Christian Burial is going to be Monday morning at Our Lady of Perpetual Help Cathedral at 10:30. Let me just briefly say on a personal note that I feel very fortunate that this magnificent lady was kind enough to give me a job here many years ago. And let it simply be said that she was always very fair in her dealings with those of us who worked for her, and she's, of course, going to be missed.
Okay, well said, Bill. Well, Helen Duhamel was well known throughout this region as a woman who built a thriving business in a man's world. Her friends are many. Today we talked with some of them about her leadership.
I always thought she was about 8 feet tall, because when I would encounter with her, she's, very pleasant, however, very, seemed like impressive to me. She was a leader. You could tell that just
years with her, and working with her and knowing her. She was a dynamic person, very powerful woman. And yet she had a heart as big as gold. One of the good things was you always knew where you stood with Helen. You had a question, go and ask her. You got an answer, you knew where you stood. You knew it was. And that meant a lot.
Area that I knew little or nothing about. To me, Helen Duhamel is truly a pioneer in so many things. I don't know how long she lived in South Dakota, but certainly she was a pioneer in the communications field.
Helen liked she liked to argue a little bit. And if you argued back with her, gosh, she loved that. And we had some good old arguments, and it always wound up with, well, now, honey, things are going to get better.
As an example of the kind of person Helen was, Harley Hansen was our sports director at the time, and Harley had a heart attack, and he was out of work for several months. And every week, Harley got his check. And Helen was a very generous person and just a very fair boss.
Fire me.
And thanks to
was when I found out that she was doing an awful lot of philanthropic work for an orphanage. And I was promotion director at the time, and I thought, by golly, I'm going to make a big thing out of this. So I took it to her. I said, this is what I've got in mind, Helen. We should let people know about this. She looked at me and she says, if you make one word of this public, you are fired. Just like that. That was her own thing, and she didn't want people to know she did it. And she did this for many, many years.
Broadcasting. Oh, Helen will miss you. We're glad we had her. I'm glad I